The heavy wooden door of the Iron Promise clubhouse creaked open under the weight of a small hand, letting in a sliver of late afternoon sun that cut through the dim haze of cigarette smoke and engine oil. Grace Harlan, all of 11 years old, stepped inside clutching a rusted chunk of metal. A piston rod, bent and scarred, like something dragged from the wreckage of a forgotten dream. Her overalls were smeared with grease, her dark hair tied back in a frayed ponytail, and her eyes, wide and unblinking, scanned the room filled with leather-clad men nursing beers at scarred oak tables. The air hung thick with the low rumble of conversations, the clink of bottles and the faint echo of a jukebox playing an old blues tune about lost roads. But everything stopped when she spoke, her voice steady despite the tremor in her small frame. "I need help finishing it. For my dad." Henry Cole, the club's president, sat at the head of the long table, his weathered hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. At 58, he was a mountain of a man, his beard streaked with silver, tattoos from decades of rides snaking up his arms like veins of iron. He'd seen a lot in his years leading the Iron Promise, lost brothers, bar fights that spilled into the desert night, promises sworn over graves that the wind couldn't bury. But this? A kid walking in like she owned the place, holding a piece that hit him like a ghost from the past. He recognized it instantly. The custom alloy from Lucas Grant's experimental engine, the one his old friend had poured his soul into before the shadows took him. Lucas, the genius mechanic who'd patched up more bikes than Henry could count, gunned down in a back-alley deal gone wrong 2 years back. No justice, just whispers of crooked cops and rival crews. Henry set his mug down, the thud echoing like a gavel. "Grace, that you, kid?" The room shifted, chairs scraping as eyes turned. Big Mike, the club's enforcer with arms like pistons himself, leaned forward from his spot by the bar, his brow furrowing under a bandana. "What's a little girl doing here with that junk? We ain't a daycare." Murmurs rippled, some chuckles, some wary glances, but Henry raised a hand, silencing them. He slid off his stool, boots thudding on the plank floor. Han knelt to her level, the scent of leather and faint whiskey on his breath. Up close, Grace looked smaller, her cheeks smudged with what might have been tears or just more grease. But her grip on the piston was fierce, knuckles white. "It's not junk," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Dad was building this engine to prove something. Stronger, quieter, for the long hauls. He said it was for the club, for the promise, but he didn't finish. They took him before he could." Henry's throat tightened, memories flooding back like exhaust fumes. Lucas had been more than a brother in the club. He'd been the spark, the one who fixed what was broken, who believed in second chances when the world didn't. They'd ridden together through dust storms and dawn patrols, sworn oaths under starlit skies to protect their own. And that engine? It was Lucas's redemption project, born from his own scars, a stint in the service, a family shattered by war, pieced back with wrenches and welds. Henry had promised to see it through after the funeral, but life and the club's endless grind had buried it under tool benches and forgotten crates. Now here was Grace, Lucas's shadow carrying the weight. "How'd you get this?" he asked, voice low like confiding in the wind. She shifted the metal in her hands, turning it so the light caught the etched initials, LG, faint but unmistakable. "I kept it hidden in the shed. Mom doesn't know. She says it's time to move on, but I can't. I watched him every night, learned the turns, the talk. I can finish it. But I need the shop. And I need you to believe me." The clubhouse fell quiet, the jukebox fading to a hush, as if the walls themselves leaned in. Henry stood slowly, his shadow engulfing her, and placed a calloused hand on her shoulder. It was light, but in that touch was a vow unspoken, the kind that bound men like him to causes bigger than themselves. Word spread fast in the Iron Promise. By evening, the back lot filled with the growl of Harleys idling, brothers pulling up in a loose convoy, headlights piercing the twilight like accusatory eyes. Tommy Rook Ellis, the youngest patch at 25, hopped off his bike first, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd been Lucas's apprentice, green back then, but loyal to the bone. "She serious, Press? The kid fixin' to rebuild the beast?" Henry nodded from the clubhouse steps. Grace beside him now, the piston tucked under her arm like a talisman. Dead serious, and we're going to make sure she does. For Lucas. For the promise. As the sun dipped below the desert horizon, painting the sky in streaks of fire, Henry led Grace into the workshop, a cavern of steel and shadows, tools hanging like ancient weapons. The air smelled of oil and possibility, the faint hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She moved with purpose, small fingers tracing the half-assembled engine block on the workbench, its frame a skeleton waiting for life. Henry watched, arms crossed, as she slotted the piston into place with a click that resonated deeper than any revved motor. It fit perfectly, seamless, like she'd been born to it. The club gathered at the edges, Mike cracking a rare smile, Rook handing her a wrench without a word. In that moment, the weight of old losses lifted just a fraction, replaced by something raw and real. A legacy not lost, but passed on. But shadows lingered. Whispers from the edges spoke of the night Lucas died, tipped off by someone inside, maybe, or a grudge from the old wars. Henry felt it in his gut, the pull of unfinished business. As Grace worked, her focus unbroken, he stepped outside, lighting a cigarette under the emerging stars. The desert wind carried the distant howl of coyotes, a reminder that promises demanded payment. He'd protect her, finish this engine, uncover the truth. For Lucas, for the family they'd chosen. And as the first stars blinked on, Henry knew this little girl's arrival wasn't chance. It was the spark to ignite them all. The night deepened, engines cooling in the lot, but inside the workshop, the real work began. Grace pointed out flaws in the camshaft, her voice gaining strength with each explanation, echoing her father's cadence. Henry listened, the club's moral compass realigning around this pint-sized force. Justice wasn't just about wheels and roads, it was about honoring the quiet heroes, the ones who built instead of broke. And in Grace's eyes, he saw the redemption they'd all chased, proof that some fires couldn't be snuffed out. Word count, 872. The workshop lights cast long shadows across the cluttered benches, where half-forgotten projects gathered dust like ghosts of rides not taken. Grace's small hands moved with a precision that belied her age, adjusting the piston rod she'd just fitted, her brow furrowed in concentration under the harsh glow of the overhead lamp. The air hummed with the faint tick of cooling metal and the occasional clatter of tools, a symphony of creation that pulled the Iron Promise brothers closer, their usual banter hushed to murmurs. Henry leaned against a workbench, arms crossed over his broad chest, watching as she traced the engine's skeletal frame with a grease-streaked finger. "See here," she said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a spark plug igniting. "Dad reinforced the crankshaft with that custom alloy, makes it hold up under heat without warping, but the timing chain's off by a tooth. It'll seize if we don't realign it." Rook nodded, handing her a socket wrench without being asked, his young face etched with a mix of awe and grief. He'd spent countless nights under Lucas's wing, learning the dance of gears and grit, back when the shop was alive with laughter and the roar of test runs. Now with Grace at the helm, it felt like echoes of that time resurfacing, pulling at the frayed edges of their loyalty. Big Mike hovered nearby, his massive frame dwarfing the tools, but he didn't interrupt. Instead, he wiped a rag across a nearby vise, clearing space as if preparing for battle. The club had seen its share of fixes, bikes pieced back from wrecks, brothers mended after scrapes with the law. But this was different. This was mending a soul, or at least the shape it left behind. Henry's mind drifted as Grace worked, the scent of fresh oil mingling with memories that clawed their way up. Lucas had shown up at the Iron Promise a decade ago, fresh from the sands of distant wars, his eyes hollow but his hands steady. They'd bonded over late-night rebuilds, sharing stories of promises made in foxholes and on endless highways, vows to protect the vulnerable, to stand against the tide of corruption that chewed up good men. Lucas's engine wasn't just a machine, it was his testament, designed to power a custom rig for long-haul charity runs, delivering aid to forgotten towns where the law turned a blind eye. "It'll change things," Lucas had said once under a canopy of stars, the desert wind whipping at their jackets. "Quiet power for the road ahead. No more breaking down when it matters." Henry had clapped him on the back then, sealing the pact with a nod. But 2 years ago, That pact shattered in a hail of gunfire behind a rundown warehouse. Lucas's body slumped over his toolbox, the engine blueprint crumpled in his pocket. The thought twisted in Henry's gut like a loose bolt. Whispers had circulated since, rumors of a setup, a rival crew tipped off by someone wearing an Iron Promise patch or worse, badges from the local sheriff's office turning blind for the right price. Henry had chased leads in the aftermath, riding dusty back roads with a handful of brothers, but every trail went cold, buried under layers of indifference and red tape. Now, with Grace here, those shadows felt closer, stirring the club's dormant sense of justice. He stepped forward, kneeling beside her as she torqued the chain into place, the metallic snick echoing like a loaded chamber. "Your dad. He ever talk about who might have wanted him gone?" The question hung heavy, the workshop's hum fading as the others strained to hear. Grace paused, her eyes flicking to the engine block, avoiding his gaze. The light caught the faint scar on her knuckle, a remnant from some long-ago mishap in the shed, perhaps. Not much, just that some deals go sour and people forget promises. But he said the club was his anchor. You all were. Her voice cracked just a fraction, the weight of unspoken loss pressing down, but she straightened, wiping her hands on her overalls. This engine, it's got a governor he invented, keeps the revs steady even on rough terrain, for those rides where you gotta push through storms. Rook let out a low whistle, impressed, while Mike grunted approval, the first crack in his skeptical armor. As the hours slipped into the small hours, the workshop became a forge of renewed purpose. Brothers rotated in shifts, fetching parts from the club's stores, carburetors salvaged from old wrecks, gaskets cut fresh under Grace's exacting instructions. The air grew warmer, thick with the tang of solder and sweat, the rhythmic clangs building a cadence that drowned out the night's chill. Henry watched it all, the way Grace commanded the space without raising her voice, her small frame a beacon amid the steel giants. It reminded him of Lucas in his quieter moments, teaching not with lectures, but with the steady turn of a wrench, instilling honor in every adjustment. But beneath the progress, tension coiled. Outside, the lot's security lights flickered, casting wary beams into the darkness, as if expecting trouble to roll in on silent tires. By dawn's first blush, the engine's core took shape, a gleaming heart amid the chaos, valves whispering promises of power. Grace stepped back, hands on hips, surveying her work with a nod that echoed her father's pride. The club encircled her, a wall of leather and resolve, their faces lit by the rising sun filtering through grimy windows. Henry placed a hand on the block, feeling the faint warmth of exertion, and met her eyes. "We're in this, kid, all the way, for him." She smiled then, small but fierce, the kind that forged unbreakable bonds. Yet, as the first birds called over the desert, Henry couldn't shake the unease, a sense that finishing this project meant dredging up the past, facing the corruption that had stolen Lucas. The Iron Promise wasn't just rebuilding an engine, they were reigniting a fight for the moral ground they'd sworn to hold. The convoy stirred outside, engines coughing to life as brothers prepared for the day's patrol, but the real ride was just beginning. Grace gathered her tools, tucking the piston blueprint into her pocket, her steps lighter now, buoyed by the family's chosen embrace. Henry followed her out, the cool morning air slapping awake the lingering doubts. Redemption wasn't a straight road. It twisted through betrayals and buried truths. But with her at the lead, the club would navigate it, honoring the legacy that refused to rust. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The morning sun climbed higher, gilding the desert horizon in hues of gold and rust as the Iron Promise workshop thrummed with a new rhythm. Grace wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a fresh streak of grease across her skin, and stepped back from the engine block. It stood prouder now on the workbench, its components interlocking like the pieces of a vow reassembled. Crankshaft aligned, valves seated with precision, the custom governor humming faintly under her touch. The air carried the sharp bite of heated metal and the earthy undertone of sand sifting through cracked windows. a scent that spoke of rebirth amid the club's weathered bones. Henry lingered nearby, his boots planted firm on the oil-stained concrete, watching as brothers like Rook and Mike handed her tools in silent deference. No one questioned her lead anymore. Her knowledge had woven itself into the fabric of their circle, a thread stronger than any chain. Rook knelt beside the bench, his fingers tracing the reinforced housing Grace had just bolted in place. "This thing's a monster," he murmured, voice laced with the reverence of someone who'd glimpsed the divine in machinery. "Lucas always said it'd outlast us all, pull through dust devils and downpours without a whimper." Grace nodded, her ponytail bobbing as she adjusted a fuel line, the soft click of the connector echoing like a heartbeat steadying. She'd inherited more than skill. It was the quiet conviction, the way her eyes narrowed in focus, mirroring her father's unyielding drive. But as the group worked, the conversation turned inevitable, drawn by the pull of unfinished stories. Big Mike, ever the blunt force, broke the hush first, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Kid, you ever see anything off with your old man? Nights he came back jumpy like the road had teeth." She hesitated, small hands pausing over the carburetor. The workshop's fluorescent buzz suddenly louder in the pause. Outside, the distant rev of a lone Harley cut through the air, a scout brother circling the perimeter, but inside, the weight settled heavier. Grace's gaze drifted to the engine as if seeking answers in its gleaming surfaces. "Sometimes," she admitted finally, her words measured, like metering fuel into a wary intake. He'd locked the shed door after dark, sketched blueprints by lantern light, said there were folks who didn't want this built, people who profited from breakdowns, from rigs that failed when lives hung in the balance. Henry's jaw tightened, the pieces slotting into place like gears meshing. Lucas's project wasn't just innovative. It threatened the underbelly of the trucking world, where cut-rate parts and rigged inspections lined pockets in high places. Whispers of a network, shady suppliers tied to local enforcers, even badges that looked the other way for a cut, had circled the club after his death. It explained the ambush, not random but targeted, silencing a man who built for endurance over exploitation. The realization hung in the air like exhaust fumes, thickening the camaraderie into something sharper, more vigilant. Henry pushed off the bench, his shadow stretching long across the floor as he paced to the open bay door. The desert stretched out beyond, vast and unforgiving, dotted with saguaros that stood sentinel like forgotten promises. He'd ridden these sands for decades, enforcing the Iron Promises code: protect the road, honor the fallen, stand against those who twisted justice for gain. But Lucas's end had tested that oath, leaving cracks in their unity, doubts about insiders, about whether the club's own had faltered. Now, with Grace's arrival stirring the embers, Henry felt the moral fire reignite. "We finish this," he said, turning back to the group, his voice steady as a low idol. "But we do it smart, no loose ends. Rook, pull the service logs from the archives. See if any parts for this beast came from suspect suppliers." Grace watched him, her expression a blend of determination and quiet fear, the kind that came from carrying secrets too big for small shoulders. She resumed her work, threading a wire harness through the block with deft twists, but her mind wandered to fragmented memories. Her father hunched over the workbench in their backyard shed, the lantern's glow casting flickering shadows on walls papered with sketches. He'd hum old road ballads, his calloused hands guiding hers over tools, teaching her that true power lay not in speed, but in reliability, the quiet strength to carry others through the storm. "This engine's for the good runs," he'd say, eyes distant, delivering hope where the suits won't. She'd nodded then, too young to grasp the risks, but old enough now to sense the danger closing in. As she tightened the final bolt, a faint vibration hummed through the frame, the first whisper of life, and the brothers gathered closer, their faces illuminated by the promise of motion. By midday, the workshop pulsed with activity, the clang of metal on metal punctuating bursts of dialogue. Mike fired up the compressor, its steady whoosh filling the space as they pressure-tested the seals, watching for leaks that could spell failure. None came. Grace's adjustments held true, the engine's integrity a testament to legacy unbroken. Yet as the sun beat down, turning the air shimmering with heat, An uneasy ripple spread. A dust plume rose on the horizon, approaching fast, not the club's convoy, but a sleek black SUV, tinted windows reflecting the glare like judgmental mirrors. Henry stepped outside, shielding his eyes, the gravel crunching under his boots. The vehicle pulled up to the gate, engine purring to a halt, and a man emerged, tall, suited with a sheriff's star glinting on his chest. Deputy Harlan, no relation to Grace despite the name, a fixture in these parts known for his iron grip on order. "Henry Cole," the deputy called, his tone clipped, laced with the authority of someone who bent rules like exhaust pipes. "Heard you've got a little project going. Mind if I take a look? Regulations on experimental builds, gotta make sure it's all above board." The words dripped with insinuation, the kind that hinted at inspections turned raids, permits revoked on whims. Inside, Grace froze, wrench mid-air, her heart pounding against the engine's steady hum. Henry met the deputy's gaze, unyielding, the wind tugging at his vest like an urging hand. This was no routine check. It reeked of the old shadows, the corruption Lucas had brushed against. Brothers flanked him instinctively, Rook at his side, Mike looming like a barrier, forming a wall of leather and loyalty. The standoff stretched, the desert heat amplifying the tension, until Henry nodded curtly. "Workshop's open, deputy, but touch nothing without asking." As the man strode in, his eyes scanning the engine with calculated interest, Grace slipped behind the bench, clutching a blueprint like a shield. The air crackled with unspoken challenges, the moral line drawn clear. This wasn't about safety. It was about control, about burying innovations that exposed the rot. Henry watched every move. His promise to Lucas and now to Grace, burning brighter. The iron promise had faced down worse, but this intrusion marked the turning point, pulling them deeper into the fray. Redemption demanded confrontation, and as the deputy circled the project, the club's resolve hardened, ready to defend what they'd sworn to build. Outside, the sun crested its peak, casting the lot in stark relief, while inside the engine waited, its potential a silent challenge to the encroaching dark. Grace met Henry's eyes across the space, a nod passing between them, small but unbreakable. The road ahead twisted with threats, but together they'd talk through, honoring the quiet courage that defined them. The deputy lingered, questions probing like wrenches in tight spaces, but the club held firm, their chosen family a fortress against the storm. As the afternoon waned, the first test run loomed, not just of metal, but of the truths they'd unearth along the way. The deputy's boots echoed on the concrete floor, each step deliberate, like the tick of a timing chain slipping out of sync. He circled the engine block slowly, his eyes, sharp and unyielding under the brim of his hat, tracing every weld and fitting with the scrutiny of a man who knew how to dismantle more than just machines. The workshop air thickened, the earlier hum of activity stifled into a tense hush, broken only by the faint drip of condensation from a nearby radiator. Grace pressed herself against the workbench, her small fingers gripping the edge until her knuckles paled, the blueprint crinkling under her touch. Henry's stance remained rooted, arms loose at his sides but ready, the leather of his vest creaking softly as he shifted weight. Behind him, Rook and Mike formed a subtle phalanx, their presence a quiet wall of resolve, the scent of their sweat mingling with the oil to create an undercurrent of defiance. Deputy Harlan paused at the governor, leaning in close enough that his shadow eclipsed the gleam of the alloy. "Custom work, eh? Looks solid. But who's signing off on the specs? We got standards around here. Can't have backyard tinkerers flooding the roads with untested rigs." His voice carried that polished edge, the kind that masked threats in questions, honed from years of leaning on folks who couldn't push back. Henry met his gaze levelly, the desert light filtering through the bay door, catching the silver in his beard. "All above board, deputy. Blueprints from a certified source, Lucas Grant's design, our brother. You remember him." The name hung like a thrown gauntlet, subtle but pointed, stirring the air with the ghosts of old inquiries. Harlan's expression flickered, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth, before he straightened, adjusting his belt with a jangle of hardware. Grace's heart raced, a staccato beat against her ribs as memories surfaced unbidden. Her father locking the shed that final night, his face etched with worry, whispering about eyes on the prize, kid, but watch the shadows. She'd hidden then, peeking through the slats as headlights swept the yard, but the shots had come later, muffled echoes that shattered the quiet. Now, with this man probing their sanctuary, it felt like those shadows creeping back, testing the bonds they'd just reforged. Rook stepped forward a fraction, his voice low and even. "We're just honoring a legacy, sir, nothing more." But Harlan ignored him, his attention snapping to Grace, who shrank back instinctively. "And you, Missy, what's a girl like you doing knee-deep in this? Schoolwork not enough." Henry moved then, positioning himself between them, his bulk a shield without aggression. "She's family. Learned from the best. Now, if you're done sightseeing, we've got work." The deputy lingered a moment longer, his eyes narrowing on the engine's core, as if weighing whether to pry it apart right there. But something in the club's united front, the way Mike's massive hands flexed idly, the steady stares made him reconsider. He tipped his hat with a nod that felt more like a warning. "Keep it clean, Cole. Shall be checking back. Wouldn't want any complications." The words trailed as he turned, striding out into the glare, the SUV's door slamming like a judge's gavel. Dust billowed in his wake, the vehicle peeling away with a growl that faded into the vastness. The workshop exhaled collectively, tools clattering as hands resumed their tasks, but the mood had shifted, edged with urgency. Henry rubbed his jaw, the stubble rasping under his palm, and turned to Grace. "You all right, kid?" She nodded, though her eyes betrayed the storm within, wide and searching. He knew Dad's name, like he was waiting for this. The admission landed heavy, pulling the brothers into a huddle around the bench. Rook fetched a stool for her, his movements gentle, while Mike cracked his knuckles, the sound like gravel under tires. "That badge reeks of the old stink," Mike growled. "Remember the tip-off after Lucas went down? Harlan's crew dragged their feet on the scene, called it a robbery gone south. Bull." Henry paced the length of the space, the concrete cool under his boots, his mind mapping the threads like a schematic. Lucas's death hadn't been random. The positioning of the body, the untouched wallet, pointed to execution. Silencing a man whose engine could upend the market for faulty parts peddled by insiders. Whispers tied Harlan to a ring of suppliers, folks who greased palms from garages to precincts, ensuring their junk ruled the roads while innovations like Lucas's gathered dust. The Iron Promise had steered clear, focusing on their code of aid runs and brotherhood, but this intrusion crossed a line, threatening the very heart they were rebuilding. "We dig deeper," Henry decided, stopping at the engine, his hand resting on its frame like an oath. "Rook, hit up your contacts in the salvage yards. See what parts Lucas sourced last. Grace, anything from his notes, names, sketches?" She delved into the blueprint, unfolding it across the bench under the lights, the paper worn thin from years of handling. Lines and annotations danced before her father's precise script evoking his voice in the quiet. "Here," she pointed, finger tracing a circled supplier, Desert Forge Components. He marked it, questionable stock, test twice, said the alloy felt off, like it was cut with cheaper metal. Rook's eyes lit with recognition. Heard that name before. Shady outfit on the edge of town, run by a guy who owes favors to the sheriff's boys. The pieces clicked, fueling a fire that spread through the group, the moral imperative to expose the rot, to turn Lucas's legacy into a weapon against it. As afternoon bled into evening, the workshop transformed into a command center. Brothers filtered in from patrols, adding their voices to the strategy, mapping routes to the supplier, cross-checking logs for any Iron Promise ties. Grace contributed seamlessly, her insights sharpening their plan, the engine's hum now a backdrop to their resolve. The air filled with the aroma of strong coffee brewing in the corner, steam curling like resolve taking shape. Henry watched her, the way she sketched adjustments on scrap paper, her small form commanding respect. This wasn't just about metal anymore. It was redemption woven through loyalty, a promise to unearth truth amid the corruption that had claimed one of their own. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the desert in fiery strokes, the saguaros casting elongated guards. The club gathered at the bay door, engines idling in the lot like impatient steeds, ready for the reconnaissance ride. Henry clapped Grace on the shoulder, the touch conveying volumes. "Stay sharp inside. We'll bring back what we need." She nodded, clutching a fresh wrench, the weight of their trust anchoring her. As the convoy rumbled out, dust swirling in their wake, the workshop fell quiet save for the engine's potential pulse. Grace sat alone for a moment, the shadows lengthening, but the fire in her chest burned steady, a daughter's vow to finish what started in love, now fueled by justice. The Iron Promise rode into the twilight, their chosen family unbreakable, chasing the dawn of accountability. The first stars pricked the sky as reports trickled back via radio static, confirming suspicions. Desert Forge had records of deliveries to Lucas, laced with subpar materials that could have doomed his project. Henry's voice crackled through, laced with grit. "We're closing in. Hold the fort." Grace worked on, tweaking the fuel system, each turn a step toward unveiling the betrayal. The night deepened, the desert wind whispering through the cracks, but inside purpose glowed, honor reclaimed, one bolt at a time. If this chapter's spark ignites something in you, hit that like button below and let us know why in the comments. Your support keeps these stories rolling. The desert night wrapped the Iron Promise Clubhouse in a shroud of velvet black, broken only by the workshop's single lamp, casting a pool of amber light over the engine block. Grace sat on a stool too tall for her, feet dangling just above the oil-slicked floor, her small hands methodically calibrating the fuel injectors. The faint scent of solvent lingered in the air, mingling with the cooler bite of evening air seeping through the cracked door, carrying whispers of sagebrush and distant thunder. Each twist of her screwdriver sent a soft ping echoing off the metal walls, a solitary rhythm that steadied her nerves amid the quiet. The radio on the bench crackled intermittently, Henry's voice cutting through the static like a beacon. "Eyes on the yard, guards posted, but sloppy. Hold tight, kid." She nodded to the empty space, as if he could see her ponytail swaying with the motion. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling loose panels on the clubhouse roof, a restless murmur that mirrored the churn in her chest. Grace's mind wandered to the blueprint spread before her, her father's annotations blurring under the strain of unshed tears. He'd drawn these lines with the same focus she now chased, his voice a ghost in her ear. "Precision over power, Grace. It's what keeps the promise alive." The engine responded to her adjustments, a subtle purr emanating from the test probe as she fired the ignition sequence, a low throaty hum that vibrated through the bench like a heartbeat awakening. It was progress, tangible and warm, but laced with the chill of what the brothers might uncover. Desert Forge wasn't just a supplier. From the scraps of conversation she'd overheard, it was a nexus of deceit, where substandard parts funneled into the veins of the trucking routes, dooming rigs to failure and lives to the roadside. The radio sputtered again, Rook's voice this time, edged with urgency. "Prez, we've got eyes on manifests, Lucas's order tampered with, swapped alloys logged as premium, Harlan's signature on the waiver." Grace's hand stilled, the injector slipping from her grasp with a clatter that seemed to amplify in the solitude. Tampered. The word landed like gravel in her throat, stirring fragments of that fateful night. Her father arguing in hushed tones on the phone, something about cut corners killing more than engines. She'd hidden in the shed's loft then, clutching a rag doll as shadows lengthened outside. Now, piecing it together, the betrayal cut deeper. Someone had poisoned her father's dream from within, turning innovation into a target. She wiped her palms on her overalls, the fabric stiff with dried grease, and leaned closer to the radio. "Rook, you there?" Her voice, small but clear, pierced the static. A pause, then his reply, warm despite the tension. "Yeah, kid. We're good. Just stirring the nest. You holding the line?" She glanced at the engine, its contours gleaming under the light, a fortress of her making. "Yeah, it's purring like Dad said it would." The exchange grounded her, a thread of the chosen family pulling taut across the miles. But as the signal faded, footsteps crunched outside, deliberate, unhurried, not the familiar thud of club boots. Grace's pulse quickened, her eyes darting to the bay door half open to the night. A silhouette emerged from the gloom, broad-shouldered and cloaked in shadow, the glint of a badge catching the moonlight like a warning flare. Deputy Harlan stepped into the light, his hat tipped low, the same calculated stride from earlier now laced with intent. The air shifted, carrying the faint tang of his cologne, synthetic and sharp, clashing with the workshop's honest grit. "Evening, Missy," he drawled, eyes scanning the space before settling on her, cold and appraising. "Heard the boys rode out. Left you all alone with the prize?" Grace slid off the stool, positioning herself between him and the engine, her stance echoing Henry's unyielding poise. The hum of the block seemed to falter in the charged silence, or maybe it was just her imagination. "They're not far. What do you want?" Her words came steady, schooled by years of watching her father face down skeptics, but inside, fear coiled like a loose timing belt. He chuckled, low and without humor, circling the bench with hands in his pockets, the jangle of keys a mocking counterpoint to the night's hush. "Just checking on progress. Can't have little girls playing with fire, especially not one tied to old ghosts." His gaze flicked to the blueprint, lingering on the circled supplier name, and Grace's stomach twisted. He knew. The realization hit like a backfire, hot and sudden. Harlan's presence here, unannounced in the dead of night, screamed complicity. The waiver Rook mentioned, the foot dragging after her father's death. It wasn't oversight. It was orchestration, a web spun to protect profits over promises. "Dad trusted folks like you," she said, voice gaining steel. "But you let them bury him. For what? Junk parts that break?" The deputy's mask slipped, a flicker of surprise yielding to something harder, his hand drifting toward his belt. "Watch your tone, child. This ain't your sandbox." But before he could advance, the radio erupted, Henry's bark cutting through. "Grace, intruders on sight. Harlan's there. We're turning back. Full throttle." Tires screamed in the distance, engines roaring to life like an avenging storm, the ground trembling faintly under the approaching convoy. Harlan froze, calculation etching his features, then back toward the door, his retreat a tactical withdrawal. "This ain't over, Cole's little shadow. Tell your president to rein it in, or the road gets rougher." He vanished into the dark, the crunch of gravel fading, leaving only the echo of his threat and the acrid scent of intrusion. Grace exhaled, shaky but unbroken, her hands trembling as she righted the injector. The engine's hum steadied her, a reminder of the legacy at stake, not just metal and motion, but the moral spine her father had instilled. Minutes later, the lot filled with the thunder of returning bikes, headlights sweeping the workshop like searchlights of solidarity. Henry burst through first, his face a storm cloud, Rook and Mike close behind, their vests dusted with the night's grit. "You okay?" Henry demanded, kneeling to her level, his calloused hand gentle on her arm. She nodded, pointing to the radio log she'd scribbled. "He came for it. Knew about the tampering. It's all connected. Desert Forge. The waiver, Dad." The brothers absorbed it, the air electric with revelation. Rook spread the pilfered manifest on the bench, yellowed paper detailing the sabotage. Alloys diluted to fail under load, routed through Harlan's oversight. Mike's fist clenched, veins bulging like pistons. Bastards poisoned the well. Lucas sniffed it out so they ended him. Henry's eyes darkened, the weight of command settling heavier, but in their depths burned the fire of justice deferred no longer. This wasn't vengeance. It was reclamation, honoring the quiet oaths of brotherhood against the corruption that festered in high places. "We expose it," he said, voice resonant as a revved throttle. "The engine runs tomorrow, proof of what could have been. Then we ride to the source, drag the truth into the light." Gray slotted the final component, the click sealing their pact, the engine's full idle a defiant growl that filled the space. Dawn crept in, painting the horizon in soft pinks, the desert awakening to their resolve. The iron promise circled closer, a family forged in loss and loyalty, ready to torque the wheel of fate. Harlan's shadow loomed, but so did their light, unyielding, promising redemption through the roads ahead. As the first rays touched the block, Grace felt her father's presence, not in grief but in the power they'd unleash, a legacy that roared against the silence of betrayal. The convoy would roll soon, Not just for the test, but for the reckoning, their honor, the unbreaking chain. The dawn light filtered through the workshop's grimy windows, turning the engine block into a silhouette of burnished steel against the paling sky. Grace stood back, her overalls hanging loose on her slender frame, hands clasped in front of her as the low rumble of the ignition sequence built to a steady thrum. The air vibrated with it, a deep resonance that seemed to pulse through the concrete floor and into the bones of everyone gathered. The Iron Promise brothers encircling the bench like guardians at a rite. Oil and exhaust tinged the breeze slipping in from the open bay door, carrying the crisp scent of dew-kissed desert sage, a fragile peace before the day's heat. Henry's hand rested on the throttle linkage, his weathered fingers steady, eyes locked on Grace for the final nod. "Your call, kid," he said, voice rough but warm, like gravel smoothed by time. She stepped forward, small but unbowed, and twisted the key. The engine caught with a cough, then settled into its rhythm, a quiet roar that filled the space without overwhelming, the custom governor holding the revs even as the pistons danced beneath the housing. No sputters, no shakes, just pure, reliable power, the kind Lucas had dreamed of for those endless aid runs across forgotten backroads. Rook let out a whoop, muffled quickly into a grin, while Big Mike crossed his massive arms, a rare nod of approval creasing his face. The vibration hummed through Grace's palms as she touched the frame, a connection that bridged the years, her father's ingenuity alive in the metal's warmth. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back, the club's silent vigil wrapping around her like a shield of leather and loyalty. Henry killed the ignition, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant call of a roadrunner outside, its sharp cry a punctuation to their triumph. "She sings," he murmured, clapping Grace on the back with a gentleness that belied his size. The brothers murmured agreement. Tools set aside as they absorbed the moment. Not just a machine breathing, but a promise fulfilled, pulling them from the shadows of loss. Yet triumph carried an edge, sharpened by the night's revelations. The pilfered manifest lay open on the bench, its scrawled notes a map of deceit. Diluted alloys routed through Desert Forge, signed off by Harlan's hand, dooming rigs to roadside graves while lining pockets with blood money. Lucas had uncovered it, his engine a threat to the fragile empire of cut corners and blind eyes. Now, with proof humming in their grasp, the Iron Promise faced the moral crossroads, expose the rot, or let it fester like rust on a neglected frame. The convoy assembled in the lot as the sun crested fully, bathing the rows of Harleys in golden fire, chrome glinting like drawn blades. Henry briefed them under the clubhouse awning, the wind tugging at maps pinned with manifest clippings, the air thick with the tang of fresh gasoline from topped-off tanks. "We ride to the forge first. Quiet recon, no guns drawn, get samples, witness statements from the yard hands. Then we roll to the sheriff's outpost. Lay it all out for the feds if Harlan's boys block us." Rook revved his bike idly, the growl underscoring his words. "What if they roll heavy?" "That deputy's got pull. Could spin this as club trouble." Mike snorted, mounting his ride with a creak of suspension. "Let 'em try. We're not breaking, we're mending what's bent." Grace watched from the workshop steps. The engine crated now in a reinforced trailer, hitched to Henry's lead bike, its weight a tangible anchor. She wanted to ride with them, to stand at the front of the storm her father had faced alone, but Henry had drawn the line, gentle but firm. "You hold the heart here, kid. We'll bring the fight home." Her nod was resolute, fingers tracing the blueprint folded in her pocket, the paper soft from countless touches. As the engines roared to life, a thunderous chorus that shook the ground, she felt the pull of their bond, the chosen family extending like a chain across the sands. Dust plumes rose as they peeled out, taillights fading into the haze, leaving the clubhouse in a hush broken only by the settling grit. Alone again, Grace returned to the workshop, the engine's crate a sentinel in the center. She busied herself with final tweaks, polishing fittings, logging tolerances in a notebook with her father's old pen, its ink still faintly scented with machine shop residue. The morning stretched, the sun climbing to bake the air, but her mind raced ahead, piecing the puzzle her father had left. The tampering wasn't isolated. Lucas's sketches hinted at a wider web, faulty brakes on aid trucks, inspections rubber-stamped for profit, lives bartered like spare parts. She'd overheard him once, voice low in the shed. They profit from the breakdowns, Grace, but we build to last. Now that truth burned in her, a quiet fury fueling her resolve. She sketched addendums to the blueprint, enhancements for durability, turning the engine into more than a project, a symbol to rally against the corruption. By noon, the radio crackled to life on the bench, static giving way to Rook's tense whisper. Trouble at the yard. Harlan's crew showed early, spooked the workers. We got a sample, but they're circling like vultures. Grace's grip tightened on the handset, the plastic creaking. Get out. Bring it back. Henry's voice cut in next, steady amid the engine noise in the background. We're clear, kid, but it's hotter than we thought. Harlan's calling in markers, says we're tampering with evidence. The words landed like a wrench dropped on concrete, the implications twisting. If the club pushed, the law could twist it into assault, bury the truth under charges. Grace paced, the workshop's shadows lengthening with the sun's arc, her small steps echoing the larger strides of justice, teetering on the edge. She fired up the portable generator, connecting leads to the crate for a systems check, the hum a comforting drone against the uncertainty. Lights flickered on the diagnostics, green across the board, flawless, unbreakable. It was her father's redemption, and theirs, a machine that wouldn't fail when the road turned treacherous. Memories flooded, late nights in the shed, Lucas's hands over hers, teaching the talk of truth over force. Honor isn't loud, Grace. It's the steady pull that gets you through. She clung to that now as the radio fell silent, the weight stretching like an endless highway. Twilight painted the desert in bruised purples when the convoy returned, battered but whole. Bikes scarred with fresh scratches, faces grim under dust masks. Henry dismounted first, unhitching the trailer with Rook's help, the crate thudding softly as it settled. We got it, he said, holding up a vial of alloy shavings dull and impure under the floodlights. Tests'll show the dilution, enough to prove sabotage, but Harlan's mobilizing. Word is he's spinning a raid by dawn. The brothers gathered, voices low and urgent, mapping contingencies, safe houses, ally calls to honest feds beyond the county line. Grace knelt by the crate, her presence a calm amid the storm, and slotted the sample into a test kit. The chemical reaction blooming negative, proof irrefutable. Henry watched her, the club's moral fire reflected in her eyes, and knelt beside. Your dad would be proud. This ends tomorrow. Not with fists, but facts. We ride to the outpost at first light, present it clean. She met his gaze, the weight of legacy shared, for the promise. The night deepened, stars wheeling overhead like witnesses to their vow, the engine's quiet potential a heartbeat in the dark. Betrayal's web tightened, but the iron promise stood firm, their loyalty the unyielding frame. Redemption rode with them, one truthful mile at a time, toward the dawn where justice would finally turn the key. The first light of dawn sliced through the desert haze, turning the endless sands into a canvas of muted gold as the Iron Promise convoy rolled out from the clubhouse. Henry's lead, Harley thrummed steadily at the front, the trailer's weight pulling just enough to remind him of the cargo's gravity. The crated engine, its flawless heart now armed with irrefutable proof against the shadows that had claimed Lucas. Grace had insisted on riding shotgun in the club's utility truck trailing the pack, her small frame buckled in beside old-timer Eddie, who gripped the wheel with hands scarred from a lifetime of honest labor. The air rushed cool and sharp through the open window, carrying the faint, acrid whiff of creosote bushes awakening, while the bike's engines wove a low symphony of resolve. No one spoke much. The wind did that for them, whipping vests and tugging at resolve like an urging hand. Henry glanced in his mirror, catching the line of brothers, Rook on his flank, Mike anchoring the rear, their silhouettes etched against the rising sun like sentinels on a moral march. The manifest and alloy samples rode secure in his saddlebag, documents that peeled back the layers of deceit. Diluted metals funneled through Desert Forge, inspections rubber-stamped by Harlan's crew, turning reliable rigs into hazards for profit. Lucas had seen it, his engine a blueprint for better, and paid with his life. Now, this ride wasn't vengeance. It was the steady talk of truth, honoring the promise sworn under starlit oaths to protect the road's vulnerable. The outpost loomed ahead, a squat building of faded adobe on the town's edge, its flag limp in the still air, a symbol of authority long bent. As they pulled into the lot, gravel crunching under tires like bones settling, the sheriff's cruisers were already arrayed, Harlan's black SUV prominent, flanked by deputies nursing coffee from styrofoam cups. The air hung heavy with diesel fumes and tension, the desert's quiet broken by the convoy's dying rumble. Henry dismounted first, boots hitting ground with purposeful thud, and unlatched the trailer, the crate's lid creaking open to reveal the engine's gleam. Grace hopped out behind him, blueprint in hand, her eyes steady despite the knot in her stomach, the morning chill raising faint gooseflesh on her arms. Brothers formed a loose perimeter, hands visible and empty, a wall of leather that spoke louder than shouts. Harlan emerged from the outpost door, his hat casting a shadow over features tightened into a mask of feigned surprise. "Cole. Early for a social call. What's this? Field trip?" His voice carried that oily confidence, but up close under the harsh fluorescent spill from the doorway, it cracked at the edges. Henry met his stare unblinking, the sun warming his back like an ally. "No games, Harlan, we're here with evidence. Your waivers, the tampered shipments, Lucas Grant's death ties right to it. Faulty parts killing more than engines. Time to come clean." He slid the manifest across the hood of a cruiser, the papers rustling like dry leaves in a gathering wind, alloy vial glinting beside it. The deputy's eyes flicked to Grace, narrowing as recognition dawned, her presence a living echo of the man he'd helped bury. She stepped forward, small but centered, unfolding the blueprint with hands that didn't tremble. "Dad built this to last, to help the runs that matter. You let them poison it, his work, his life." Her words cut clean, echoing Lucas's cadence, drawing murmurs from the other deputies, some shifting uncomfortably, badges heavy on their chests. Harlan's hand twitched toward his radio, but Rook's quiet approach, flanking without threat, stilled it. "Call your feds if you want," Henry added, voice low and even like a governor holding steady. "But this ends today for the promise." Tension coiled, the lot's heat building as the sun climbed, sweat beading on brows amid the standoff. One deputy, a younger one, eyes darting, broke first, stepping to the papers, his face paling at the signatures. This is Harlan's mark. I signed off on a couple myself, thought it was routine." The admission rippled, cracking the facade as more heads turned, the moral weight pressing like an unbalanced load. Harlan barked a denial, voice rising sharp, but the evidence mounted. Witness calls from the yard hands Rook had quietly lined up, recordings of pressured deals. The outpost door swung wider, an older sergeant emerging, radio in hand, his gaze weary but appraising. "Stand down, Harlan. Feds are en route, 30 minutes. Looks like we've got a house cleaning." Grace watched it unfold. The engine's frame beside her a silent witness, its contours catching the light like forged honor. Harlan's empire crumbled in fragments, arrest whispers, cuffs glinting as backups arrived, the web of corruption unraveling under the desert's unyielding glare. No shots fired, no roads torn up. Just the quiet power of truth talking through lies, the iron promises loyalty, the unbreaking chain. As the deputy was led away, his glare lingering on Grace like a fading exhaust trail, she felt the lift, a burden shared, her father's shadow stepping into light. By midday, the feds had taken statements, the manifest sealed in evidence bags, promises extracted for deeper probes into the ring. The convoy reformed, lighter now, the trailer secure as they headed back, the road unspooling under tires like a vow kept. Henry rode beside Grace's truck, wind in his beard, a nod passing through the window, approval, pride, the seal of family chosen. Back at the clubhouse, the workshop welcomed them with its familiar hum, tools waiting like old friends. They uncrated the engine one last time, mounting it to a test rig under the afternoon sun, the air thick with anticipation and the sweet tang of clean fuel. Grace turned the key, the ignition catching smooth, the roar building to that steady thrum, powerful yet restrained, a testament to endurance. Brothers cheered low, hands clapping her shoulders, the vibration coursing through them all, mending fractures long ignored. Henry knelt beside her, voice rough with emotion. He'd say it's perfect, kid. You finished it, for him, for us. She smiled, small and radiant, the desert breeze ruffling her hair, carrying away the last echoes of grief. The engine idled on, a legacy alive, powering not just machines, but the quiet revolutions of justice and redemption. In the days that followed, the Iron Promise's aid runs multiplied, the engine's prototype leading convoys to remote towns, delivering supplies where corruption had left voids. Grace found her place among them, wrench in hand, her courage a spark that reignited their code. Losses scarred but didn't define, promises endured, binding the chosen family tighter than any weld. Under starlit skies, Henry raised a toast to Lucas, the desert wind whispering agreement, honor's road stretching endless and true. Thank you for riding with us through this tale of legacy and loyalty. If stories like Grace's journey touch your heart, please subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got more roads of redemption ahead.